Week 2 of the Diddy trial ended with explosive testimony from Kid Cudi revealing how Diddy was involved in arson and how he had allegedly threatened to kill him. Escorts and male sex workers who were present at Diddy's freak-off parties have testified and named the celebrities they saw, with Diddy photographs and voice recordings presented by the prosecutors directly link Diddy to these crimes and prove that Diddy was a dangerous and violent man.
Cudi had a brief relationship with Cassie Ventura during this time, and Combs allegedly made threats against him because of it. Cudi testifying that he believes Combs actually broke into his house. He testified that a few months later, a Molotov cocktail was placed on his Porsche, damaging his car. He told the jury he reached out to Combs after his car caught fire and described him with his hands behind his back like a Marvel supervillain. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges, and his defense team says any sexual encounters were all consensual. Legal contributor Eric Faddis joins me now for more. So, Eric, what do you think? How does Ms. Cudi's testimony impact Combs' arson charges and the racketeering conspiracy counts that he faces, you think?
Yeah, Jerry, I think we're firmly moving into RICO territory here. We're getting past some of the sex trafficking allegations, talking about a criminal enterprise that was allegedly engaged in committing crimes. And so Kid Cudi's testimony goes to trying to prove some of those predicate offenses. He says that Diddy and his team burglarized his home after Diddy found out that he was dating Cassie Ventura, and then shortly thereafter, blew up his vehicle, which goes to arson. And so that was really the thrust of the testimony. That was the purpose for putting him on. There were some points scored by defense as well. It was some colorful testimony.
During her testimony, Cassie mentioned how Diddy had threatened to Kid Cudi when he found out that he was dating Cassie. Cassie warned Kid Cudi that Diddy would come after him, and days later Kid Cudi's car blew up. When Kid Cudi showed up at the scene, he saw a Molotov cocktail near the car which had been dropped inside the car from the sunroof. Before this event, Diddy had broken into Kid Cudi's house and threatened him.
Committed actions. Combs during Cudi's brief relationship with Cassie Ventura in 2011, during an apparent breakup between Cassie and Combs.
Kid Cudi had dated Cassie Ventura, and she testified that it made Sean Combs jealous and angry.
Cudi testifying about an alleged break-in at his house in 2011, which he says was Combs showing up when he wasn't home. Cudi testifying that he had a tense phone call with Combs, where Combs insinuates he was at Cudi's home. I said, expletive, you in my house? And he was like, what's up? I was like, expletive, are you in my house? And he said, I just want to talk to you. I was like, I'm on my way over right now. He was like, I'm here. When he arrived, Combs was not there.
But he said Christmas presents he had bought for members of his family were unwrapped, torn open, and his dog was locked in the bathroom.
Cudi says he later called police, who took a report. With the headline moment of this testimony, Cudi describing an alleged 2012 incident where his Porsche 911 convertible had been set on fire. It looks like the top of my Porsche was cut open, and that's where they inserted the Molotov cocktail, Cudi testified. Arson is part of the racketeering conspiracy count Combs faces. Cassie Ventura previously testified that Combs threatened to have Kid Cudi's car blown up.
Kid Cudi's car fire has been talked about for years, but it's significant now because federal prosecutors are trying to convince the jury that Sean Combs used arson as part of a criminal enterprise. That's one of the predicate acts of the racketeering conspiracy charge. Combs denies it.
Combs denies all the charges against him.
Although he was confused about why it would matter if Sean Combs knew that he was dating Cassie, he had no reason to believe that they were still romantically involved. Remember, Kid Cudi had been dating Cassie, he says, for about a year at this point. He went and he got her from her apartment, and he took her to the only place he thought would keep her safe, which is the Sunset Marquis. It's a hotel in LA. So in this phone call with Cassie, she says, look, Diddy knows we're dating. He asked for your address. I gave him your address, and I'm so scared right now. So he goes and he picks her up at her place and takes her to the Sunset Marquis Hotel. While they're there, they got a phone call from a friend of Cassie's who said, I'm sitting in front of your house right now, Kid Cudi. Sean Combs and an associate of his are inside your house. And that's when he was like, what is going on? He said he was angry. So he gets in his car. He said it was a Porsche 911 convertible. And on his way to the house, that's when he's starting to get worried about What am I walking into? Could Combs have weapons? Who else could be there at the house? Could this turn violent? Although he said he did want to fight Combs for breaking into his house. And so he called 911, but he also called Combs and he said, why are you in my house? And he said, I'm on my way. So when he got to his house, Diddy wasn't there. What he did notice was that his surveillance cameras were turned the other way, some Christmas presents were unwrapped from Chanel for his family, and that also his dog was in a bathroom with the door closed.
Prosecutors have revealed images from the arson investigation that was conducted by the police, and it can be seen clearly that the car's sunroof was cut open by someone. Kid Cudi's car blowing up days after Diddy threatened to come after him isn't a coincidence. The only reason Diddy wasn't arrested was because there was no direct evidence tying him to the crime. Kid Cudi even met up with Diddy a few days after.
Last week we heard testify about Combs threatening to set fire to his Porsche. Talk to me about what he said inside today about that incident.
Kid Cudi and Cassie stopped dating after this whole incident in which Combs allegedly broke into his house. So on this particular night, he's staying at an ex-girlfriend's house, and while he's there, early in the morning, he gets a call from his dog's babysitter who's house sitting for him and says, your car's on fire in the driveway. So, he instructs her to call 911. The authorities and the fire department show up at his house, and then he calls a friend to go there and start taking pictures of his car. When he gets there, authorities are already at the scene, and what they find is something called a Molotov cocktail. That was a bottle with liquid in it and a rag that had been set on fire, and somebody had cut the roof of his convertible and dropped it inside. And then we saw pictures of all this damage today, and he said that unfortunately his car could not be repaired. So police collected all of this evidence, and there was some sort of an investigation. But today we heard on cross-examination Brian Steele, who's a very famous attorney out of Atlanta who represented Young Thug in his state RICO case. And he got up there and really tried to poke holes in this idea that Combs was the one who destroyed his Porsche. And he said, look, there was an investigation, nobody was charged, and they even took DNA evidence and fingerprints at the scene. And what connects Combs to this incident, right? Because all we really know is that Cassie said that Combs threatened to do this, but there isn't any security footage. There isn't any proof that Combs either told somebody to do it or actually did it himself.
Cudi says he and Combs met at the Soho House in Los Angeles.
He said he remembered walking into a room with all sorts of glass windows and Sean Combs staring out the window, his hands behind his back, looking like what Kid Cudi called a Marvel supervillain. That earned something of a chuckle inside the courtroom. But he said Combs' demeanor was very calm.
Cudi said he told Combs that Cassie told him she and Combs were broken up. When the meeting ended, he says, we stood up, shook hands, and as I was shaking his hand, I said, what are we going to do about my car? He looked right back at me, very cold stare, and said, I don't know what you're talking about.
And remember, Cassie Ventura had sent her mom an email just before Christmas in 2011 saying that Combs had threatened to harm both her and Scott Cudi.
Cudi testified that Combs basically apologized for everything without admitting any involvement in the firebombing a couple of years later, and that Cudi had made peace with it. After his testimony, Kid Cudi posting to his Instagram stories.
And I'm just seeing all the love and support, and I just want to say thank you so much, man. This is a stressful situation. I'm glad it's behind me.
Arson is one of the RICO predicates included in Combs' indictment. In addition to bribery and narcotics distribution, prosecutors need to prove Diddy was involved in multiple crimes to prove that his operation falls under a RICO case. During Kid Cudi's testimony, jurors were shown photographs of the damage to his Porsche, revealing a 2FT hole cut in the convertible's soft roof and smoky damage to the car's red interior.
No one was ever prosecuted. No one was ever prosecuted. There's no direct evidence at all linking Sean Combs. And that's a problem. It's enough for the court of public opinion, but it's not enough for a court of law where proof beyond a reasonable doubt is required. Do we think he did it? Heck yes, we think he did it. But I don't know if that's enough to prove arson as one of those crimes that they've alleged was part of his RICO criminal enterprise.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Apart from the fact that he threatened to do it before it was actually done, there's no evidence that he used a staff member or anyone in his enterprise to do that either. I was more interested in the break-in and an assistant named Capricorn Clark, who apparently Kid Cudi said screamed to him on the phone, I was forced into a car and forced to drive with Diddy to your home where I am parked right now, and he is in there in your home right now. To me, that screamed with a receipt almost of forced labor and coercive behavior within your enterprise to commit a crime.
Yeah, it's possible. It's not enough to show he's a really bad guy. It is definitely not enough to show that he is an abuser, which they have proven beyond all doubt. They must show these crimes.
For the first time since the start of the trial, photographs from the day of Diddy's arrest were also released, which show Combs' hotel room filled with bags of drugs, bottles of baby oil, and even guns. Officers from Homeland Security testified that they found $9,000 in cash at Diddy's hotel room, proving that just hours before their arrival, Diddy was engaging in a freak-off session.
First look inside Combs, look inside his Miami mansion, the day federal agents busted the gate open last year to raid it. Federal agent testifying about the evidence, guns and ammo seized from Diddy's home that were found near alleged freak-off supplies, which included dozens of bottles of baby oil and boxes of platform heels, bondage restraints, and bundles of rope. Also photographed as evidence that day, motivational messages on Combs' bathroom mirror that included "You a legend" and "Upward motion," and drugs. Lots of drugs, including ones found in plastic bags inside a Gucci bag, and orange tablets with the Tesla logo that tested positive for ecstasy. Now, Combs has pleaded not guilty to all allegations in this case.
So we just got new exhibits today. Take a look at these photos that prosecutors have just released. They're pictures of Diddy's former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, with what she says are bruises on her back and legs, which you can see here, and also a gash above her eye. Also released today, some pictures from when Diddy was arrested in September of last year at the Park Hyatt Hotel in New York. And a special agent with Homeland Security testified last week that some of the items found included baby oil, drugs, these pink packets of ketamine. There's also this image of a knife wedged in a door. Now, Combs, we aren't sure if he's going to be taking a stand in his own defense, but he denies all of the allegations against him. But will all of these witnesses really prove the government's charges that he was running this criminal empire and that he's guilty of trafficking?
With photographic evidence and witness testimony proving that Diddy was involved in these crimes, his lawyers are trying to ask for a mistrial. They claim that Kid Cudi's testimony would poison the jurors against him.
Diddy's lawyer Brian's going to push for a mistrial yesterday during Kid Cudi's testimony. And the reason that he was about to push for a mistrial is because he thought that Kid Cudi was going to say that Diddy unalived people. One of the last questions that was asked to Kid Cudi in his testimony by the government is if he had safety concerns, and this is basically why he left his relationship with Cassie Ventura. Then Diddy's team called for a sidebar where you go up to the judge and you express concerns or issues that you're having. Brian Steele said, "Your Honor, I'm going to move for a mistrial. The government knows the answer that is about to be that Mr. Combs has had other people unalived. This is an outrageous question." And the judge shot back quick and said, "He didn't say that." Then Brian Steele says, "But he will say that." And the judge said, "He hasn't said that." Brian Steele said, "Well, he's about to say it, and I'm putting the court on notice." And the judge went in even harder and said, "No, you don't get to put me on notice. There are no grounds for any application along those lines of a mistrial, because no question that you are talking about has been asked and the answer has not been given." The judge then says, "Now what is your objection to the question that was asked?" Brian Steele says it again, "Why were you scared of Mr. Combs?" And his answer is going to be because Mr. Combs is violent. He had other people unalived. The judge then says his understanding of the things that had happened and his understanding of that event is not a 404A issue, which is what was raised, correct?
Diddy's attorney Brian Steele is quoted as saying in the court transcript, "Your Honor, I'm going to move for a mistrial. The government knows that the answer is about to be that Mr. Combs has had other people killed. This is an outrageous question." According to Steele, his objection came on the grounds that he expected Cudi's answer to a question about being scared of Diddy to be, in Steele's words, "Because Mr. Combs is violent, he has had other people." This, however, didn't happen.
I believe that that's going to be his answer to why he was scared. I'm preempting it because I know the court if he says it. Basically saying if Kid Cudi said that Diddy had people unalived, that he was going to move for a mistrial. The judge then says, That's the way you raise the issue? Okay. Yes, I just wanted to give you a preview. Now, what further questions do you have, Ms. Johnson? And this is government. I don't have any further questions on this. I don't believe that that's what he would say. I was specifically directing this to the end of the relationship and his concerns at that time. The judge says, well, to be fair, you asked the question and you got your answer. And Mr. Steele, your point is, let's just move on, right? And Brian Steele says, please. And then the judge said, so let's move on. Nothing ended up coming from it because Kid Cudi did not say that Diddy had anybody unalived. His response to that question was that Diddy was violent.
The real reason Brian Steele was so worried about Diddy being labeled as a murder is because he knows that everyone on the jury expects Diddy to be violent. Diddy's executive assistant testified that he quit after he saw Diddy beat Cassie on a private plane. George Kaplan, Diddy's assistant, worked for Combs from 2013 to 2015, during which time he saw Cassie lying on the floor on her back just after screaming, "Isn't anybody seeing this?" During a violent incident aboard Combs's private jet in 2015, Kaplan testified that no one, including security, intervened.
And so he would see all of these things take place. He was on direct describing an incident on a private plane between Sean and Cassie, in which he described Sean as holding up like a rock glass, and heard Cassie then say, "Isn't someone seeing this?" talking about a beating that was taking place right there in the moment. Now, George eventually left because he said he was tired of hiding the domestic violence from everyone. So he's a former executive assistant to Combs, and he testified that he witnessed Combs be violent with Ventura while on that private jet in 2015. He did hear that glass break and saw Combs standing over Ventura. He told the jury that Ventura did scream, "Isn't anyone seeing this?" So that's been some of the testimony. He has testified to several incidents of domestic violence that he saw at the hands of Sean Combs toward Cassie, and then also a name we've heard in this case, Gina. Julie, when Cassie was on the stand, as well as one of her friends, that was Carrie Morgan, she was saying that Gina was a real problem. George Kaplan was talking about some domestic violence that he witnessed for Gina as well, a time when Sean was throwing apples really hard at Gina, and Gina was covering her face. Abilities increased. He began to set up the hotel rooms. And what did he say that he would use to set up the hotel rooms? He said they would have what was called a hotel bag. Inside that hotel bag would be things like the baby oil, the Astroglide, liquor, drugs, he mentioned. So he mentioned several different items that he would bring in to set up the hotel rooms. He also said that afterwards, what his responsibility was to clean up those hotel rooms after things were taking place behind closed doors. And he said he wanted to do this, put the room back together as perfectly as possible, because he didn't want anyone selling any kind of photographs of the hotel room to try to make Sean Combs look bad.
Audio recordings of one such incident were also played in court. In this recording, Cassie can be heard screaming after finding out that Diddy had been distributing her freak-off tape to other men.
Recording played in the courtroom. Recording played in the day. I don't know in the courtroom if there was a reaction, but kind of give the context to that and what the reaction was.
One of the things that the government keeps bringing up is that Cassie felt like she was being blackmailed by Combs, that he had videos of these drug-fueled sex parties known as freak-off, and that he threatened to release those videos publicly, and that at one point he even showed them to people, and that this was to embarrass her, to silence her, and to force her to keep having freak-offs, that he hung it over her head. And in one shocking moment today, I was in the courtroom. They actually played audio of Cassie screaming at a man named Sujit. This was after she had learned that he might have actually seen one of those freak-off videos. But in that audio recording, that Cassie actually was the one who recorded herself talking to Sujit. In this recording, she is screaming at him, saying that she'll kill him, or that she'll have someone else take care of him and kill him. And it's a different side of Cassie that really none of us have ever heard before. I definitely don't think it's the last time that we're going to hear that audio recording. I think at some point we'll see the defense or even the prosecution circle back to that. The overall vibe today in the courtroom is that Combs' defense team is struggling. There's a lot of stopping and starting because the prosecutors are constantly objecting to the evidence that they're trying to admit. The judge is even getting frustrated at one point, saying that we need to set ground rules.
Celebrities who were involved in the cover-up of Diddy's crimes were also named during the case. Usher and Neo allegedly both saw Cassie B. and Don Richard, a former member of Danny Ka, testified that Usher had seen Combs punched Ventura in 2010 at a restaurant in West Hollywood. Mr. Combs paid Cassie in in the stomach. They were having a private conversation and he pet her in the stomach. She immediately leaned over and left.
John Richards says she was alone in witnessing Sean Diddy Combs' abuse. During her second day of testimony in the music mogul's federal trial, the 41-year-old described an alleged 2010 incident when Combs punched his then-girlfriend Cassie Ventura in a West Hollywood, California restaurant and said Usher was also a witness to the event. During her testimony May 19th per NBC News, which had a reporter in the courtroom, she said, quote, Mr. Combs punched Cassie in the stomach. They were having a private conversation and then he punched her in the stomach. She immediately leaned over and left. In addition to Usher, Richard, who is a member of the girl group Danity Kane, which was formed on Combs' show Making the Band in 2004, alleged that other musicians, including singer Neo, record exec Jimmy Iovine, and rapper Big Daddy Kane were present as well. When Richard and Ventura got into a car to leave after the alleged restaurant incident, Richard said another physical altercation took place between Combs, who has pleaded not guilty to all charges, and his then-girlfriend. She continues in her testimony, quote, We got in the car to head back to her house. Combs grabbed her, slapped her, popped her in the mouth, and told her to shut the f*** up. Everyone was quiet the rest of the ride.
One of the male sex workers Diddy hired to abuse Cassie has also testified, and the things he has to say are shocking. The male sex worker named Punisher testified that allegedly Cassie would wince and sigh every time Diddy would order her to be intimate with him. In her testimony, Cassie mentioned how her stomach would churn at the thought of being degraded and passed around like an object. But she was scared of what Diddy would do if she said no.
Next up on the stand, after Cassie's mom stepped down, a man who goes by the name, wait for it, the Punisher. Punisher is an exotic dancer, former sex worker, whose real name is Sheree Hayes. Mr. Hayes told the jury that he got his nickname playing basketball, but his photos, they seem to tell a different story for why he may be using that name today. Kind of safe for work, almost not safe for work. I wouldn't put it up at work, but that's the Punisher, y'all. Mr. Punisher testified that he was hired by Diddy and Cassie for 8 to 12 different times, things like, and he was meant to create a sexy scene that would last for hours. He said that Diddy called all the shots in these episodes. He didn't call them freak-off, but he described what we've heard as freak-off. He never saw any cameras, he said. He didn't see any violence. And he said, although Cassie would sometimes wince or sigh at some of the sex directions that came from Diddy, he said it didn't seem as though Cassie was there against her will. Again, this is a prosecution witness, so that's kind of, on the fence. He does certainly corroborate the freak-offs and what happened in the freak-offs. That whole business about, to him, he wasn't sure if Cassie was into it or not, but he did hear that she winced and that she sighed as Diddy gave a lot of those directions. By the way, the Punisher also said that he never saw Diddy take drugs, never saw that he seemed drunk or high, which is exactly what prosecutors tried to show, that this was not just an out-of-control, party of an enlisted megastar, but instead was a clear-eyed criminal enterprise.
One of the male sex workers Diddy hired to Cassie has also testified, and the things he has to say are shocking. The male sex worker named Punisher testified that allegedly Cassie would wheeze and sigh every time Diddy would order her to be intimate with him. In her testimony, Cassie mentioned how her stomach would churn at the thought of being degraded and passed around like an object, but she was scared of what Diddy would do if she said no.
She did not interview Cassie, any victims in this case. She was providing general testimony about victims of domestic abuse, how they cope, what different levels of abuse there are, how do people recover from it, the trauma they experience, really what was taking place in regard to the back and forth, the cross as well as the direct, was a lot of attacking by the defense counsel as to her credibility and her qualifications. We do have some testimony we can put up for you, though, on this when she was on the stand this morning. Let's go ahead and put that up, and I can tell you exactly a little bit more about it. So Hughes confirmed that she has never testified in the defense of a man accused of a sex crime. This was on the cross-examination. I don't evaluate offenders, is what she responded with. Hughes maintained that prosecutors have not discussed specifics of this case with her. This cross-examination was done by a man, an attorney named Mr. Bach. And you could tell, Judge Ashley, when he was doing his cross-examination, he is very skilled at cross-examining expert witnesses. He again brought up how much money she is being paid and how much she makes from really just being an expert witness in trials. So he was asking her about that.
Bipolar disorder and other mental health issues don't excuse all the horrible crimes that Diddy committed. He had been blackmailing Cassie ever since she was 19. Cassie endured so much, and every time she tried to get away, Diddy would beat her and at times even threaten to come after her mother.
But something interesting came up was when Combs' defense team referenced his bipolar disorder, and that's really the first time that we're hearing that he might actually have a diagnosed clinical condition. We know that he has talked about his temper, his mood swings. I mean, that's how he got his nickname, right? Puffy, because he huffs and he puffs. But it's no laughing matter. We know that he's capable of incredibly terrifying violence. Just take a look at that 2016 security footage of Cassie being brutally beaten by him. And so, now we're learning that perhaps he might have been on medication. He sought treatment, and he may have bipolar disorder.
Property. What did they find?
Well, you started to list it, Eva. The guns, the drugs, the freak-off supplies. And I think what was most striking, perhaps, for the jury to see was the proximity. There were the AR-15 style assault rifles right in the same shelving unit as the baby oil and the Astroglide and the platform heels and the lingerie. And then in another part of the house, there was the loaded .45 caliber handgun that was found in a red suitcase. All of this was being kept by Combs for what reason we don't know, but federal prosecutors, I think, are hoping to make a link, especially between the guns and the freak-offs, because their whole theory of the case is that Combs used violence and the threat of violence to coerce women, particularly Cassie Ventura.
Forensic psychologist Don Hughes was called as an expert witness. Hughes told jurors it's common for victims to stay in abusive relationships and testified that perpetrators often use several abuse methods besides physical violence to make victims feel trapped. It's about the power and control that the abuse has over the victim. The testimonies, the photographs, the recordings, they all tell a story that can no longer be silenced. From threats and violence to cover-ups and freak-off parties, this trial is exposing more than just crimes. It's uncovering a legacy of power and manipulation. And while Diddy's legal team scrambles for a mistrial, hoping to bury the facts under legal technicalities, the world is watching. The victims are speaking and the mask is slipping. If you want more real, unfiltered breakdowns of this case as it unfolds, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this trial, it's far from